It is my great pleasure to welcome you here today to hear from the wonderful Marian Rakosi. So 24-year-old children's educator Marian Rakosi is a passionate early childhood educator and proud unionist from Sydney. She is the spokesperson for the National Big Steps campaign, whose aim is to transform the early childhood education and care profession into what it should be, an industry that is stable, respected and well paid. Marian is part of the changing face of trade unions in Australia, now dominated by women in the health, education and childcare sectors. Today, she's here to talk to us about the new dynamic surrounding unions, and she argues for the importance of organising for mutual benefit to win professional wages and to build a quality early childhood and care system here in Australia. So, would you join with me? It's my great pleasure to welcome Marian Rakosi.
So, I have 3 words for you. Red, fire, ants. Boom! I thought that deserved a sound effect. Red fire ants. Random, I know, but it'll allow me to paint a powerful visual analogy. But before I do, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on which we stand today. This was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. And so right now I ask you to reflect on just 2 things. First, I ask you to acknowledge the humbling fact that gatherings like this, storytellings like this, learning, teaching, living, breathing, life has been occurring on this land for thousands and thousands of years. And so we have so much to learn from the land and its first people. Second, like Kerry Arabina had so eloquently done on International Women's Day earlier this year, on this very stage, I ask you to reflect on your own ancestry and the course that your life has taken, including the people in your life, your decisions and your values that have brought you either here in this room or that drew you to click on that link and watch this video and share in this moment with me. So I'd like to start off by sharing a piece of my story with you. And on a side note as well, I think that this is something that we need to do more of sharing stories, because stories are powerful. Stories connect us to each other. And stories help us float rather than sink when we're struggling. So anyway, when I reflect on my life, the people in my life, the decisions I've made, the values that I hold, the things that have brought me here today, I can't help but think of 2 people. The first is my mum, Juliet Rakosi, and the second is my union organiser and my friend, let's be honest, Damon Houcher. I grew up in a little housing commission unit in Mount Druitt in the western suburbs of Sydney, represent, and we didn't have much, but my mum made me feel like we had everything. She let me use our linen cupboard, because let's be honest, how much linen can you have, as a storage space for all my craft materials and my books and my blocks, all the great open-ended materials that I now provide children with as an early childhood educator. And my mum, she was the one that instilled in me a lifelong love of learning and a passion for expressing myself creatively. And then when I was 8, I lost my mum, my world, to cancer. But before she passed away, she asked her 21-year-old sister to move from the Philippines to Australia to look after me, this 8-year-old. And so naturally we were figuring out how to belong in this different family of 2. So, we didn't really get around to engaging with or discussing politics or unionism or anything in the realm of that at all. we really lived in our own little bubble, which I think has become quite common in Australia, to be honest. And our own little bubble revolved around, where would we go biking on our adventures, or what was for dinner. We didn't really engage with that outside sort of stuff. But growing up, what I did learn was the value of hard work, the value of education, and the value of relationships. And so fast forward, and it's no surprise that I myself end up as an educator. I totally reckon my mum set me up, with having all this ABC on the wall, and I have all these photos of me and dressing up like a teacher and everything. And then one day, a union organizer named Damon Houcher walks into my centre and out of nowhere really lights this fire of social justice in me that I never knew was there. And ever since then, I have been on a steep, and I mean steep, political/union learning curve. And from the day I joined my union, United Voice, I learned that the meaning of power was simply the ability to act. So I decided to stand up and speak out for our 97% female-dominated profession that had been historically undervalued and underpaid as women's work. I sought out and seized every opportunity to advocate for early childhood education and care as 3 things. 1, it is the foundation of education for our nation. 2, it is an essential service for families to return to the workforce. And 3, it is a profession in itself. And so this big story is what has led me here today. In Anne-Marie Slaughter's TED Talk, P.S. how amazing are TED Talks? If you haven't already, you should really download the TED Talks app and get on that, because they are powerful talks just in 18 minutes or less, and they're really inspiring, and it's really good for your health, trust me. So back to it, in Anne-Marie Slaughter's TED Talk entitled, "Can We All Have It All?" she says, and I quote, "Think about it. Breadwinning and caregiving are equally necessary for human survival." Breadwinning, caregiving, equally necessary. So my question is, why is one valued above the other? Why in 2014 are caregiving job roles ridiculously underpaid and undervalued when they are equally necessary for our society? So Anne-Marie Slaughter goes on to say, and I quote, "The revolution for human equality can happen. It is happening. It will happen. How far and how fast is up to us." That really stuck with me. How far and how fast this revolution happens is up to us. And I believe that this is where unions come in. And this is also where those 3 little words I began with come in. Red fire ants. Did you know that red fire ants are under constant threat of annihilation from flash floods? Can you imagine being a small ant, isolated and alone, and you look up at the sky and you see this incredible storm brewing? If a flash flood came down suddenly, you'd be history like that. But what is incredible about red fire ants is that one day they figured out that if they held on to each other and created a living raft, they could float and they could survive the flood. They would hold on to each other for months if necessary. Boom, right? So let's take a look at how we compare to red fire ants at the moment. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, union membership is declining. but it is the first time that there are more female workers, currently at 19%, compared to male workers at 17.5% that are members of a union. And for me, unions are about uniting people with the same issue and uniting people who want to fight for social justice and equality in our world. Because of my union, I've had the opportunity to meet like-minded people in my profession from across the country and build what I know are lifelong friendships, some of who are here today. Because of my union, I literally sat at a table with just 4 other educators with the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard and shared my concerns and my vision for our profession. Because of my union, I had the opportunity to jump the fence and work as a union organiser myself for 14 months so that I could spark fires of advocacy in other educators across the state, just as Damon Houcher had done for me. Because of my union, I have a voice. And I believe the only catch with unions is that you only get out what you put in. Sure, you could be a member and pay your dues and be a part of it, but it's not until you get in there and speak to your organiser and communicate with them and find out what are the issues across your sector, what are the campaigns. You need to fight for what you believe in and find your issues so that you can create that living raft and float through the floods. And I always say, once an organiser, always an organiser. So today, I wouldn't be a good organiser if I didn't ask you to take some action and unite with me in the fight that we have in early childhood education and care at the moment. At the moment, there's a debate around quality early childhood education and care. Some are saying that affordability and accessibility are the number one issues. But what we need to remember is that this is the future of our nation. These are the children who will be one day leading our country. And so affordability and accessibility cannot come at the cost of quality early childhood education and care. And that is what the National Quality Framework and the reforms in the early childhood education and sector have finally brought for us. So today, I ask you to do 3 things. One is to take a stand with me and say that quality matters for the 1 million children and their families and the 150,000 educators across the 14,000 early childhood services in Australia by going to www.qualitymatters.org.au. Please visit this website and sign the pledge and get in contact with the people in your community to make sure that quality is number 1 in this debate. Secondly, if you're a parent, you can join the National Advocacy Alliance of Parents, which runs a variety of campaigns. And you can do this by going to www.theparenthood.org.au. And thirdly, finally, if you haven't already, go to the Australian Union's website and find out, firstly, what your union is, what the achievements of unions are over the years. And if you really need any more convincing, they have a pretty great list of why you should join. And you can do that by going to www.australianunions.org.au. So enough of all the websites. I'd like to actually end today with a poem. Dear Red Fire Ant, I know you're out there, even though you mightn't yet know it yourself. Dear Red Fire Ant, I see you struggling, wondering, is there anyone that can help? Dear Red Fire Ant, let your fire burn bright so it can be seen by others, just like they did, your proud ancestors. Dear Red Fire Ant, if it's important to you, you'll make it happen. If not, you'll make up an excuse. Dear Red Fire Ant, will you hold my hand, not just to float and survive, but to fight and thrive. Dear Red Fire Ant, we will all leave this earth one day. So tell me, what will be your legacy? Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very interesting talk, and well done for acknowledging growing up in Housing Commission. I think the more we hear about people that have come from there and risen to such great heights, I think that's fabulous. Now, my question to you is, why do you think there is so much confusion around the childcare sector? So many people think that the high cost of childcare has to do with the high wages in the childcare sector, which we know isn't true. I've worked in childcare myself, and I had children back in the late 80s, and it cost me $65 a week for 2 children in childcare because of the fee relief system. So what do you think we have to do to get people to understand it's because the government got out of childcare, privatised it, and we have to start looking at that again if we're going to see an improvement in conditions? And sorry, I'm going on a bit.
No, you're right.
What's happening to the childcare workers who've been denied their pay rise that Prime Minister Gillard agreed to? What's the update on that?
Okay, so I'll start with the first question about why do we think that society doesn't have an idea about the issue about affordability compared to the apparent high wages. I think it's because as educators, we're not telling our story enough. We're not telling it loudly enough. We're really not telling our story loudly enough. And it's because, you know, we have been silenced for so long. We are a female-dominated profession, and we tend to really talk amongst ourselves, but not so much as we should with the families, with our communities, about our issues in our sector. And I think that, like I said, storytelling is a really important thing that I think we need to start doing if we are to gain traction with our story, and which we have already, but even more so. And the second thing with the update from the pay rise and everything, our campaign at the moment is at a stage where we're fighting for quality and making that the centrepiece of the debate. And the pay rises have actually gone out to Good Start and to a few other companies, I believe it is. And then the new government, Susan Lee, actually said that she's going to use that fund and put it towards professional development for the sector. So, yeah, so some centres are applying for that if they hadn't gotten the pay rise, which I think just takes away from the whole puzzle that early childhood education and care has great reforms and it's all there in writing. But the missing piece is professional wages, and without having that, you can slap on as much professional development as you like, but you're still going to have a ridiculous amount of educators leaving the sector every single week. So it's just a crazy, not even Band-Aid solution. So, yeah.
And Marian, can I ask, is there, do you see a difference in your advocacy work in the two sides of government, or are they kind of equally, are they bipartisan in their lack of support, or do you see difference in the policies?
Well, to begin with, when we were campaigning while there was a Labor government in power, they didn't really want to have anything to do with us either. And it took a lot of work. It took us going to Parliament House and knocking on all their offices and talking to them and having conversations with groups of us, and just bombarding them with emails, with messages, until finally they started speaking our language and listening to us. But it took a lot of work, and I think that's what it's going to take with this government as well, because I mean, a few years ago, early childhood education and care, as it's now rightly known, not childcare, was not even in the political agenda at all. It wasn't in the news at all. It was just this thing on the side that didn't really matter. So in terms of our campaigning towards the different parties, I think you've got to start somewhere, just like we did with the Labor government, and that's what we're doing now with the Liberal government.
And how hopeful are you?
Well, I'm a pretty positive person, but like I said, it's going to take all of us Red Fire Ants uniting and sticking together to make a difference and bringing together the different groups. We've got to unite not only educators, but families and parents and employers as well, bring them on, the ones that see that quality matters, in order to bring this government around to hear what we're really saying.
Thank you for that, Marian. It was really inspiring. What lessons do you think we can take from the way other countries do childcare and education for very young children, and implement here in Australia?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that we really need to value the early years and reconceptualize our image of the child. I mean, I was having a conversation with my boss, Gemma Carlisle, and she was saying how society kind of sets up life for children for them to fail. I mean, even she used the example of bringing your children to a cafe, for example, and they learn through play, and they're so curious and they want things to do. And she was at a cafe with her friends, and they kept telling the children, "Oh, shh, be quiet, we don't want to disturb the other people." Whereas Gemma was looking around thinking, this is so unfair to them. We need to value them and value their view of the world and how they learn and be and belong and become. And so what she did, she got a few of those little cups, where they put the baby chinos. Is that what they're called? They're so weird. Anyway, she got a few of those and some paddle pop sticks and, open-ended materials, and gave that to the child. And they just had the best time. And then after that, she convinced her friends to go across to the park across the road and let the child explore and, really value the world from their perspective. And I think in countries where they value play as a strong part of a child's learning, that's the direction that we need to head in. So I'd say reconceptualizing our image of the child firstly, valuing educators. I know in other countries they really have the scale tipped the opposite way, where you need incredibly high qualifications to teach in early childhood education, whereas we're just really catching up with that, where only this year you needed to have a minimum of a Certificate 3, otherwise a diploma or early childhood degree. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thanks for that. Oh, is that right? So one of the dilemmas, I guess, is, there's obviously a government funding dilemma that's causing a bit of this squeeze, but also, you're talking about reconceptualising the childhood education in Australia, and how, I guess one of the things that I always find quite interesting, and it really opened my eyes to the way how differently we see childhood education and potentially don't value it as highly, is that people will, spend a lot, have their children in public schools, and then for VCE, they'll be, the family will put a lot of money into sending them into a private school for years 11 and 12, when all the research shows that the biggest differences to outcomes occurs in the early learning stage. And that appears to be a phase where parents want quality but somehow don't value it enough in the same way that they say value tutors or VCE or something for their child. So, there is the government funding gap, but there also seems to me to be a bit of all of society needs to go on a journey in terms of valuing those early years. And I guess, how do you see the role of the union and childcare workers in terms of helping parents and the rest of society along that journey?
That's a great question, and all those words were music to my ears, so yay. I think that it's about us as the members of the union advocating for that and saying that we need to be telling these stories, these need to be in our communications, and we need to be advocates for our profession, really. So I think that all this comes from us making sure that we're all on the same page. And, language is power, and so we need to make sure we're using the same language and talking about the same things, and getting these messages out there, because you're right, people do need to, like you said, go on a journey about it. And like I'm sure a lot of you in the audience know, 85% of brain development occurs in the early years, and yet it's so undervalued. So I guess in a roundabout kind of way, I'm going back to the same first answer I gave, is that we need to tell our stories, we need to have the same language, be on the same page, and as members of our union, make sure that the communications that go out, that go out to all the members, have this language on it as well.
A lot of the public discourse about unions these days is pretty negative. Around, currently there's a Royal Commission into unions about, so-called union corruption. Probably the stereotypical picture of a unionist is still sort of a blue-collar man with a bushy beard. There's a declining, unions have been declining membership for a number of years. What do you think unions should and can do to sort of turn that around and to sort of reinforce in society what their role is and sort of what their position is and what they do?
I think it needs to come from the people, even though that's kind of a backwards answer. It's not so much what do unions need to do, but the people. I think that unions, their campaigns, the officials, they need to re-engage with what are the issues that the people have, and how can they get them on board and really take on their suggestions and their ideas, their hopes, their visions, and put that at the forefront, which I'm proud to say United Voice, I think, is really doing, and giving us a voice in the issues that matter to us. And like I said in my speech, one of the most exciting things being a union member is that you get to meet like-minded people that have the same issues, that want the same things. And so with unions, it really needs to be grassroots, it needs to come from the floor, and it needs to be about people coming together for the same goal. So what can unions do? I think, because you're right, in the media it's really tough to compete with those that have money power versus us that don't have the money power, but we have the people power. So I think we need to utilise that so that we can get our story out there and get our vision out there of this is what the world could look like, rather than this is how it is at the moment. So I hope that kind of answers that.
Thanks, Marian. But would you join me in thanking Marian Rakosi?